A banking crisis, inflation, and the possible indictment of a former president. We take a look at the latest in U.S. politics. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. The banking system is sound. That's the word from the Biden administration as 3 U.S. banks require help to remain afloat. Fears spread to Europe, where Credit Suisse, Switzerland's second biggest bank, was forced to tap a financial lifeline from that nation's central bank. And then there's the potential indictment of former President Donald Trump, perhaps as early as next week. This as multiple investigations appear to be ramping up. There's a lot to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Aaron Maté hosts Pushback with Aaron Maté on the Grayzone. Rina Shah is a political analyst and commentator. Also with us is Douglas Sloan. He's a principal and senior political analyst with National Capital Strategy Group. And Eric Bolling is here. He's host of The Balance on Newsmax TV. Eric, let's start with you. There's this banking crisis resurgence here in the U.S. Began with a couple of collapse of 2 mid-sized banks, I guess you'd say, Silicon Valley and Signature. We saw this dramatic move the other day. All these big banks infusing $30 billion of deposits into another struggling bank. This is First Republic, meant to calm jitters on Main Street and Wall Street. Main Street, obvious, because you got people in line trying to get their money out of the bank. They don't want to run on the bank. Wall Street, also obvious, that stock dropped 70% on Monday, down again today, though 32%, so they were not reassured either. This kind of brings back memories of 2008, where we saw a couple of banks collapse, obviously much bigger, when we saw Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns failing, but by the time the dust had settled, the Great Recession, 300 banks had closed. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen this time, but it is kind of scary. What's your take on all of this?
So I think this is vastly different from 2008. 2008, the banks were aggressively packaging and repackaging horrible loans. They were giving loans to everyone. They turn it into a package and they resell it to another group. So the bank between each other and the investment banks and the hedge funds, they had really bad garbage on the books. This time is very, very different. This time was a literal 1930s style run on the bank where the depositors, not the creditors, but the depositors said, we want our money out because we hear there's bad things going on. Now, yes, there are the 2 banks that you mentioned and maybe a third one may not survive the weekend. They were making bad bets on interest rates, but it's certainly not a systemic crisis. I don't believe this is. I think this is a couple of banks who are trying to squeeze out some extra money from their depositors, the cash that they do. They do banking. So this doesn't seem like it's going to be any sort of systemic failure by the financial system, because at the heart of it, these banks were solid. They had great credit lines. Their banking, their balance sheets were very, very strong. This is just an old style run on the banks. I will do something, I can't believe I'm saying this. I think the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve did the right thing. In other words, they guaranteed the depositors money. So anyone walks in, whether you have under $250,000, which everyone would have been insured, or more, $1 million, up to $500 million in the case of Roku, they said, depositors, this wasn't your fault. We're going to make sure you're made whole. But the shareholders of the bank and the board of directors who own shares in the bank and jobs, we're not protecting you, and they let them fail. And that was the difference between this one and 2008. And I think they've thread the needle, I'll say, perfectly on this one.
The Biden administration did the right thing. They had to lift me up off the floor. I can't believe I actually heard that from you. It's shocking. Douglas, let's hear about the Democrats' response to all of this, because after the 2008 episode in 2010, of course, the democratically controlled Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill, and of course we saw that weakened in 2018 with deregulation, and a lot of people are saying, you know, that weakened the federal oversight of these small, medium-sized banks. And we're already hearing from Senator Warren and Congresswoman Katie Porter that they want to move to kind of reinforce that legislation. But we're also hearing from some Democrats who actually went along with the deregulation, saying that they don't regret their vote. and they're not sure they're going to support this. We hear from Biden himself saying that stiffer punishment needs to be there for bank executives whose mismanagement contributed to the bank failures. Realistically, when you look at a House that's controlled by Republicans, the Senate controlled by Democrats, is anything going to happen?
I am inclined to think that we're not going to see any major action. From what I've seen in looking at this whole situation is even if some of those regulations hadn't been rolled back a few years ago, that would not have necessarily prevented what happened with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. That was really something that the Fed and the bank needed to keep a closer eye on what was happening there. Of course, they got into trouble when some of its large holdings in U.S. government bonds fell due to the raise in interest rates by the Fed to try to stave off inflation. I think all of this could have been prevented with closer scrutiny by the bank itself, by the Federal Reserve, in terms of what was happening and where they were holding much of their money. I just don't see, given that, in the Democratic Party, we have a pretty even break. Actually, it doesn't seem that way because the liberals and the so-called progressives make a lot of noise, but a lot of Democrats are really moderate, especially regarding issues like this. So I don't imagine that we're going to see any strong regulations or new legislation come forward and move onto the president's desk regarding this, because this really was something that had to do with keeping a closer eye on what was happening at Silicon Valley Bank.
And Rina, it's already been discussed here, the Federal Reserve pretty much laser focused in trying to cool the economy, the interest rates being spiked over time. There was talk of perhaps another, jump in the interest rates, but now it seems like perhaps, I don't suspect the Fed saw this coming, that they might actually take their foot off the gas and hit the brakes a little bit. What do you suspect will happen with them?
Yeah, of course, the Federal Reserve has to pump the brakes because they've artificially shocked the market and created this problem. I mean, these incremental rate hikes are the reason we're where we're at. Look, I want to say a word first because I'm a founder myself. I've had a couple failed startups over many years, in addition to my political work, and I'm really proud of that because I think entrepreneurship is so American and it's a beautiful thing. We're the home for innovation and competition, and my heart just goes out to those founders that were tied up in the mess of Silicon Valley Bank. It was a mess, and I'm glad a number of them found different banks, obviously. But that was a really, really scary thing. But to say that SVB was a small bank is just so wrong. It's not a small bank. It was so big, and what I think is really clear and apparent to younger Americans like me who look at this big centralized sort of big banking and we just laugh, because I got to be honest with you. There's some real enemies on Capitol Hill right now, sitting there propping up these big banks, and there's a lack of competition between them. And again, that's why we're here. So the Federal Reserve, these big banks, I mean, this crisis, it should just not fall on the American taxpayer. And I'm glad that the one thing that the Biden administration is saying is that, no, this is not going to be a bailout done by the American taxpayer. This is going to be done with fees from these banks, and the FDIC stepped in, did the right thing. But I think the Federal Reserve is to blame. And I have a couple more observations because I think we need to look at this very closely. As somebody that was also on Capitol Hill advising a member of Congress during the height of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, I will say we need to talk about housing and affordable housing and what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country where we own our houses or we rent our houses? You talk to millennials like me, we just don't have what our parents have. That dream is not attainable for us of owning a house. And I think all Americans ought to be able to own, hardworking Americans, ought to be able to own medium-sized houses. And where we're at right now, I think we need to look at some potential fixes, and that needs to include mortgage rates. I mean, we we need to talk about having some liquidity provided into the mortgage market. That is one potential fix right now.
Well, Aaron, let me bring you into the conversation because big picture, we've also got this impending debt crisis. We're talking about $31.5 trillion. That's money already spent by both parties. The debt ceiling needs to come up or the U.S. will default on its obligations. Republicans want steep cuts from the Biden administration, basically sort of torpedoing his agenda. Biden says no way, it's non-negotiable. Is this a double whammy where we're seeing kind of, bank issues and then also the debt ceiling? How do you see this impacting the economy? What's your take on all of this?
One area to look at, I think, is the gargantuan spending on the military-industrial complex. Hundreds of billions of dollars every single year, not just on the Pentagon budget, but also on all these different wars going on, including the Ukraine war. So that would be one area that could be reduced, but both parties never seem interested in doing that, except for at the fringes. And in terms of this banking story specifically, I want to see more oversight of the executives. They reportedly sold something like $84 million worth of stock in SVB over the last 2 years. And apparently the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank sold millions of dollars worth of stock just the day before the collapse. So I think there should be, if there are going to be reforms coming out of this, that's one place to start, is more oversight and accountability for the executives who profit and leave everybody else to foot the bill.
And that's what Biden's talking about, stiffer punishment. That's something you'd like to see?
Absolutely. And I know Biden's asked Congress for the authority to do that. And Congress usually is not very keen to provide oversight of Wall Street and the big banks, as evidenced by that bill that weakened regulation of mid-sized banks like Silicon Valley Bank. But time and time again, we get these reminders in really stark ways that a financial system like this is vulnerable and there needs to be some accountability.
Eric, another big story, of course, multiple senior officials telling NBC News that local, state, and federal law enforcement officials are bracing, trying to prepare for next week. They suspect there will be an indictment of former President Donald Trump in Manhattan. The Manhattan District Attorney investigating Trump for felony falsification of business records. This in regards to the alleged hush money given to a woman basically to cover up the affair during the campaign back in 2016. I want to get your thoughts. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on the case, the prosecutor, but I want to get your thoughts on whether or not the former president should say, look, I'm calling for calm, given what we saw on January 6th. I know that's probably unlikely, but do you think he should do it?
If I may, just clean the little thing up, because Rina said that she was a former founder, but she completely bungled the cause of this. It was the Fed raising rates. Yeah, well, that's one of the actions that may have been a part of the problem. But the real root cause of this is out of control government spending. $7 trillion flushed into the market, several more $1 trillion thrown in like a funnel hose onto the economy, caused inflation to spike to 40-year highs. And that's on Biden. That's not on the Fed. That's on Biden. The only way to cool down the inflation was to raise the rates, and banks did get caught the wrong way on rates. So let's point it where it is. And then if you want to go ahead and give loans to everyone, that's exactly what caused the 2008 crash. We were giving loans to people who shouldn't have home loans. Sorry, if you just do it for the sake of being nice and philanthropic, you're going to get a little financial meltdown at some point. We fixed the system by not giving those loans like we did in 2008. And guess what happens? Yeah, there's a bad weekend for a couple of banks, but it's not systemic globally. Anyway, Trump will probably be indicted. He may get arrested next week. And he'll still continue to run for president, but we'll make a lot of hay out of it on the media.
Rina, I want to give you a chance to respond to what he just said.
Yeah, I disagree. I believe that, obviously we saw huge global supply chain issues with the pandemic. I don't think it's all on Biden. I've seen both parties do badly on handling how much Washington spends. And also, let's just be honest about housing. The mortgage rates and the inflation on cooling down inflation on the price of daily commodities, for example, right? We always talk about $10 eggs, but that could be cool when we talk about what we could do in the housing sector as well. So, I mean, I appreciate the point, but I would just say there's a number of factors. It's just that the founders just should not have been where they were with Silicon Valley Bank. I believe it was in 1999.
They didn't get hurt, Rina. They
It
didn't
blew
get
up
hurt.
in 36 hours. You know,
They didn't get hurt. If you're talking about the depositors who are founders of startups, venture capital startups in Silicon Valley, those people were all made whole. The only people who got hurt were the board members and the president, as you rightly point out, or someone did, Aaron did, 70-something million was taken out of that bank, but those were scheduled stock sales, so there's nothing illegal about those, but they should lose their money. I agree with you. But if you're talking about founders, general founders, so the system worked.
But there was a scare there. I mean, the FDIC did what it needed to do, but the depositors were scared, and I don't think we should dismiss that easily. We were in a situation that we have not seen, and I don't even remember the last time. I can't speak intelligently about that because you're right. This was not like 2008, 2009. But when we're talking about somebody that is out there, like a payroll processor, for example, they used SVB. They couldn't even these founders couldn't even use that because their payroll processor was even using SVB. So it did cause a lot of turmoil, and we shouldn't dismiss that.
All right. I'm going to have to move on because I do want to talk about Trump. And Eric said, he may be arrested next week, indicted. Douglas, this would be kind of a remarkable setting. I mean, if he's treated like all the rest of us, there'd be a mugshot. He'll be fingerprinted. This will be pretty amazing to watch. I want to get your thoughts on this. And of course, this is not his only area of concern. Today, we heard that the feds have actually won a court battle with the judge ruling that his attorney will have to appear before the federal grand jury. So there's the federal case. There's also the case down in Georgia. Give me your take on all of this.
Yeah, there might even be a perp walk as well. We are looking at a trifecta of criminality here regarding former President Trump, and it is unprecedented. You're right. The judge just ruled that Evan Cochran will have to appear before a grand jury and testify because of a crime fraud exemption, I believe. And that may expose him criminally in terms of, what he may say. He may end up pleading the fifth. He also obviously is under indictment any day now from the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, regarding the situation of hush money payments to his mistress before the election. And, what's going on in Fulton County, Georgia with the DA down there, Fannie Willis, and his illegal tampering with the election and trying to find 11,000 votes. There is a lot to dig into here, and I'm in agreement with Eric Bolling on this. We don't agree on much. Trump will likely be indicted and be brought in and processed, I'd say before the end of this month by the Manhattan DA. And that case that DOJ has against him regarding holding classified documents at Mar-a-Lago and then obstructing justice, that's the real key. It's one thing they make a mistake. They found classified documents at Biden's house. They found classified documents at Mike Pence's house, but they both immediately admitted error, cooperated with the Justice Department to turn the documents over. Trump lied about it. When the FBI knew the documents are down there, he said no. He told his lawyer, hey, tell them that we've turned everything over. I don't have any of the documents. They knew he was lying. And it was at that point they decided to search his residence and found all those secret classified documents. So that is the real linchpin there. He's really in danger. Obviously, he's in danger with all of them. But that DOJ case, that seems rock solid. So we are really in for a show in these coming months and going into next year in the presidential election, because ultimately it may be a race to bring him into trial and convict him before the election happens, and say he wins and he's sworn in on January 2025 and he gets get out of jail free card for the next 4 years again.
Well, Rina, I think what he's just described is a really chaotic 2024 campaign. I want to get your thoughts on all of this.
Can I just say the last thing I think most Americans want is a matchup between Trump and Biden again. And I appreciate Doug's point there, but I don't want to see a show with this. I want to see justice, and justice takes time and it takes accountability. And if it's the case is laid out and shows that the former president, who is now a private citizen, has engaged in, high crimes and misdemeanors or whatever, look, we need to see him held accountable for that. And that is the type of thing that, look, I think we should celebrate when justice works. And there will be a lot of people celebrating when Donald Trump is behind bars or wearing an orange jumpsuit. But look, it shouldn't be political.
Not
It
serious.
should be
You guys aren't
completely by the
serious, are you
letter of
really?
the law.
Really?
I do think it's really scary. I do think we're in uncharted waters. I know there will be a lot of people out there who disagree and don't feel like we should see a former president be charged with crimes. But if he's committed them and we see a case that's laid out by people that have taken the time, then what is wrong with it? And I do worry about political violence that could follow. I worry about extremists who will take this to a different place if he is locked up, indicted and locked up. I worry about a perp walk. I wonder if he'll be handcuffed when he goes before the court. There's a lot of things here, and I don't think it's really funny. I'm just scared. I really am, because I do worry about political violence a great deal. I know a lot of people have been radicalized, and a lot of those people sit within the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. They are the former president's followers. They follow him to the edge of the earth, as we saw with January 6th. And that's all I can say about it. It's just a really scary time for us as a country.
Aaron, you've been very patient. I want to get your thoughts as well.
I'm not a fan of Trump, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's guilty of whatever he may be accused of in New York. But I do have to acknowledge that he has been unfairly targeted ever since he ran for president. Remember that he was subjected to, I think, the most ridiculous federal investigation in U.S. history when he was investigated as a Russian conspirator, an agent, which was completely baseless. So it was an issue I covered very extensively. And that has an impact. And I think after years of hype around that and all this expectation that he was going to be perp walked from the White House by Robert Mueller on allegations of colluding with Russia, that turned out to be a dud. And one result of that was to sow distrust in people of law enforcement and to burnish Trump's self-image as this radical outsider who's being targeted by the establishment. Because in that case, it was true. And I think people who are celebrating potential charges against Trump here should keep that in mind, along with the fact that this case here, it's about some hush payments to women, which Trump admitted to. Can you really prove that that was done for illicit campaign purposes? Maybe you can, but even if so, I don't think that's the issue that's really going to matter to most people. And I just see this as a part of the ongoing Trump circus that we've been living with for many years now.
Well, Rina, let me ask you about that. We're looking at a campaign in the Republican side. Nikki Haley's already announced that she's running. Trump has announced that he's running. And now we're seeing Ron DeSantis, although he has not declared, really kind of presenting himself as a presidential candidate. And he talked about Ukraine recently, sounding a lot like Trump, saying the U.S. has many vital national interests, but becoming entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. A lot of Republicans in Congress, John Thune, Lindsey Graham, kind of pushed back on this, condemned it. And I guess it's a two-part question. Are we seeing a rift within the Republican Party where you see more of these traditional, defense hawks, if you will, and then DeSantis and Trump kind of channeling the MAGA people who may be, perhaps a little fatigued by what's going on with Ukraine? And what does this say to allies of the United States and to Russia, for that matter?
Well, let me just say this. I don't think it's just the MAGA wing of the Republican Party that is questioning the money we send over to Ukraine. I'm somebody that's quite supportive of Ukraine, believes in supporting them financially, militarily. I see the importance there. I think it's, here we sit over a year after Russia invaded a sovereign nation. And I think democracy requires its allies step up and meet the challenges. And that's what the United States is doing. We see the importance of what's happening over there. And we are deciding to walk the talk and put our money where the mouth is. But there are a lot of Americans, whether they're moderate Republicans or independents, that feel like America is just giving a blank check to Ukraine. And that should not be discounted. This is a real sentiment. It's not just held by the far right. And I don't think it's fair to put Trump and DeSantis in the same camp on this entirely, even though they share the view and they've gone out in public and said it. I would just say, look, we're in a new era where we don't know what today's Republican Party is all about. Yeah, Trump is the standard bearer, but the minute an indictment could come down on him, Ron DeSantis gets his open door and gets to walk right on through, because truly, talking to Mid-Atlantic Republicans or Southern or even out West, there is an appetite for Ron DeSantis. He has traveled the country and has been met with some warm receptions in California and in Illinois with members of law enforcement. So I think this is Ron DeSantis's race. He decides when he gets in, and I think he's shown Americans that, yeah, he's governing Florida, and he's doing it with a really strong hand. Would I agree with all his policy takes? Absolutely not. I think he's going pretty far right. But I also know in my study of the American presidency that you can come to the center, and he can come to the center after having gone far hard right. So he's testing the waters, in my opinion. But when it comes to your question on Ukraine, I do find this quite interesting, and I'm not advising the governor of Florida, but if I were to, I would just say, remember the position you took when Barack Obama was in the White House, when the Obama administration was dealing with Russia and Crimea. DeSantis at that time said that America and the Obama administration was not being tough enough on Russia regarding Crimea. So maybe he'll find his way back to that same position regarding Russia and Ukraine.
Eric, I want to get you to handicap the Republican race right now. I mean, it's very, very early, but we've just seen this poll that came out from Emerson College basically showing a dead heat in Florida between Trump and DeSantis, although Quinnipiac is showing actually Trump extending his lead nationally. So I want to get your sense on this. What are Republicans telling you privately about this race? Because undoubtedly they're concerned about a candidate running with this kind of legal thing hanging over his head. And what are they saying publicly?
Yeah. So first of all, for all those hoping to see Trump behind bars or in an orange jumpsuit, I wouldn't hold my breath for that either. I think Aaron was right saying that there is a lot of that looks like it could be, looks like that he would deserve. It's not going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen. It's not the way Congress works. It's not the way the justice system works. It's not going to happen. But getting to the Trump DeSantis, I'm down here in Florida. I live down here, moved my family here, the show here. DeSantis is beloved by the Floridian and by conservatives across the country. The Trump supporters love DeSantis, but the mentality is it's still Trump's turn. It's still his ball. It's not DeSantis' time yet. They would love to see Trump DeSantis ticket, which would go against the conventional wisdom of having a minority or a female as a vice president, but it didn't work for Biden on our side. We don't think it did. So the feeling is if Trump and DeSantis could somehow work it out where Trump's, on top, DeSantis VP, that would be the most votes that you ever got by a GOP in the history. I'll tell you, the people are split, but I do think that it doesn't matter what if there's an indictment of Trump or whatever they find, it's still Trump's to lose. Let's put it that way. It's still his game to lose. And as you aptly point out today, Quinnipiac showed Trump extending. Now, DeSantis hasn't even acknowledged he's going to run yet, but he is. He's running a shadow campaign right now. Yeah, so he is. But it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to come down to how aggressively the two of them snipe at each other. And hopefully they're smart enough not to blow each other out of the water.
Aaron, I'm going to give you the last word. For the Democrats, is it Biden or bust?
I don't think it's Biden or bust. I think they've put out floaters for other people because they realize that he is 80 years old and he showed signs of slowing down. And look, he's presided over what I think is a very disastrous proxy war, which I think has gone increasingly unpopular and will continue to get that way the longer this war goes on.
So then what do you suspect the Democrats will do then?
Well, Kamala Harris, I think, is not up for the job. She's just doesn't seem to be very popular even within her own party, and there have been leaks designed to undermine her, I think. So they'll find somebody else. Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, just plenty of people I think the Democrats could run if Biden doesn't work out.
Douglas, I've said that he had the last word. I do have a few more seconds. I want to give you the last word. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely not. The Democrats are going with the power of incumbency here. Everybody knows how old Biden is. We all wish he was about 10 years younger, but that's not the case. But the power of incumbency is all encompassing in any given race. And if Trump is the Republican nominee, Democrats are wholly confident that Biden can beat him once again, especially if he is under indictment at that time. So trust and believe that Democrats will go with Joe Biden if Joe Biden announces, and all signs are pointing to that he will announce for presidency in 2024.
It's going to be some interesting campaign ads, that's for sure. I want to thank all of you for joining us. It's been a great discussion, and that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.